story here. I don't see that it says recording.
No.
Hello, hello, hello. I am with a great master of psychology and a humble yid. I'll let him introduce himself in a second. But not only, a lot of people, they're psychologists, but here he is a medical doctor. He runs an entire coalition for work with psychotrauma, which basically he's been counseling people with a lot of trauma for a long time. He's in the actual, some of you may remember, a war in Croatia. Unfortunately, there was a lot of ethnic wars, terrible stuff. He's dealing with, refugee situations. He's dealing with, I lived in Africa. There's a lot of crisis there, helping to train people. So we're really honored to have with us such an esteemed doctor and psychologist. And the subject of the day is how to prevent suicide. So, doctor, maybe you could introduce yourself, and then we'll get straight into getting some tips.
Okay, I'm Charles David Tauber. I am indeed a physician. I'm the CEO of something called the Coalition for Work with Psychotrauma. That's uh, with our website, www. I grew up in the States, did my medical training in the Netherlands, and have lived in Croatia for 26 years. We do training for what are called Barefoot Therapists, that is, people within the beneficiary communities who can help one another. And that's very important because sometimes people within the community know far better than the experts uh, how to work with somebody. And of course, there's less stigma attached to it. So we do a lot of that work. We do it online. And if anybody is interested, please contact. Okay.
That's interesting what you're saying. So the first thing that we can take out from what you're saying is that the fact is you don't need to be a psychologist to help someone. You can just be a normal human being that has a heart, and if you reach out with compassion, really that's what all the studies are showing. Treat the other person with respect. That's the best help. And perhaps, like you said, a lot of people don't go to psychologists because there's stigma attached. But if it's a friend, then you have a much better chance. So I know you've started this thing called Barefoot Therapist. Everybody really has to see themselves as a psychologist. Certainly, I've done a little bit of study on suicide as a Chabad rabbi. They've helped train us a little bit. And the bottom line is that anybody can prevent a suicide. All you need to do is just, if somebody looks like they've got trouble, reach out and help them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very important. One caution there is that you should know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, please consult an expert. Worst comes to worst, consult us. But do get assistance if you're not an expert and if you haven't done this. We give training on this without charge. And this kind of thing. And feel free to write to us if you want to. There's a contact page on the website.
Yeah.
If you're going to, as Rabbi Weinberg said, the most important thing in terms of suicide is to be a listener, is to reach out to the person and listen and show that you understand. Don't put the person down. Don't put words in the person's mouth. Let the person talk. Be uncritical. And show that you really do care. That's the most important thing in any therapy. There have been lots and lots of studies that have shown precisely that the most important thing in any therapeutic relationship is not the methodology of the therapy, but the relationship between the therapist and the client.
So why do you think that is? Why do you think that if I show somebody that I care about them, that can prevent a suicide?
That's human. It's simply human. Um, The reason for a lot of suicides is that people think it's not worth it. I'm not worth it. People have a very bad self-image. Uh, they don't. They also don't have a, how shall I say it, a sense of life, a sense of how to go forward. They don't have a purpose in life. There was a psychiatrist who had been in a concentration camp, a guy called Viktor Frankl, who started something called logotherapy. And you might want to have a look at that. He said that there were basically three areas in which people have to should have a sense in life. One is either your occupation or your big hobby or your big love in life. So, in other words, you have a purpose to go forward in that sense. And that can be, as I just said, doesn't have to be a job. It can be a hobby, something you love. It can be art, it can be music, it can be gardening, it can be anything. The second thing that's very important is your relationships. Uh, to have good relationships, intimate relationships, and by that I don't mean sexual relationships. I mean people to whom you can say anything. Also, yeah, very, very important. And the third is
Sorry, I didn't. There's a little bit of a lag. So, what did you say? How did you define the intimate relations again?
they don't necessarily have to be sexual relationships, but they have to be relationships with a person to whom you can say absolutely anything.
So you're saying like a good friend, basically, like somebody
Very
that
good, a
the two
very,
of you trust. Our
exactly.
sages actually say that "Kinei lechachaver," acquire a friend. You have to have at least one good friend. It's true. I'm sure if a lot of people had one good friend, they'd feel a lot better. Yeah. Please continue.
No, that's very important. And the third, also very important, especially for us as Jews, is the spiritual, the relationship with a higher being, with Hashem, in some way. And Frankl was uh, he lived through Auschwitz with this, um, and this we found with clients is very, very important. Um, the best thing, if you want to prevent a suicide, that you can do is just sit down with a person and listen to what he or she is saying, say as little as you can, and encourage them to go on. And make that not into a one time thing, but make that into a long term talk. That's the basic way. I must say, if you really think that the person is actually going to commit suicide, even after you've done that, go to somebody, call somebody. Do not let it happen. Uh, Sometimes people think that, oh, I'm saying I'm going to commit suicide just to get attention. Don't trust them, because sometimes they will try to prove you wrong. They will try and actually make an attempt, and that can go very wrong. So somebody says they are going to commit suicide, take it extremely seriously. If you feel like committing suicide, go and talk to someone. Absolutely essential that you do it. Remember something else. You are always doing the best that you can. Given your background, given the current situation, you are doing your best. There are very few things that are hopeless. Um,
There are
that,
very few things that are what? Say that again, please.
that are hopeless.
Oh,
Yeah. Um, Talk to somebody. Try and figure it out. Um, get your feelings out in one way or another. Write, do art, do music. Get your feelings out. That's a way that you can prevent suicide for yourself. After you, I have a journal that I keep. constantly. I get my feelings out. Even if I'm in the worst mood, at least I have that I can write, and it helps me to figure it out. If you're an artist, do your art. Get it out. Very, very important.
I hear you. You feel that if a person is repressing feelings, I mean, let's say somebody's got something negative and they're trying to repress it so they can move on. Um, you're sort of indicating repressing feelings is not a good idea, and getting them out is a good idea. How come?
Absolutely. Okay. Uh, Feelings are like almost bacteria. Um, if they're in a wound, if you have a wound on your hand, say, uh, and the bacteria or whatever is in there, if you let it fester, if you don't open it up, the bacteria will go inside and will get into your blood and may kill you. If you open it up and clean it out, even though that's painful, um, the wound will eventually heal. That's exactly what happens with feelings. If you keep them inside, they will go in one of two directions. They will either go outside and be violent, or they will go inside and destroy you. And by the way, they may even destroy you physically. There's very good evidence that stress and trauma and traumatization can cause physical illness in a wide variety of fields. It certainly can lead to high blood pressure. It can lead to endocrine problems. It can even lead to cancer. There's some evidence for that. It can shut down the immune system. So you must get those feelings. It can prevent suicide as well.
You know, we're in a time, unfortunately, I think the first leading cause of death amongst a certain young age bracket is suicide, which is about as bad as it gets. And what would you say to a young person who is maybe going through the stress of, I don't know, they don't know what their future is, maybe they feel they're being bullied. I think that life used to be simpler, and now that it's gotten more complicated, it's quite complex. A lot of people, I think, are certainly. I see a lot of youngsters. They have no idea what to do with their lives. Certainly, there seems to be some radical movements, which as opposed to people having healthy self-esteem, all radical movements are just kind of, it's like, a little bit like, unfortunately, like Germany. It's just like, if you follow us and work for us, then it's you have a value. But if you don't, you have no value. And I think that maybe that might be a contributing factor where people are not feeling that they have an intrinsic, maybe if they were more spiritual. And what you said really is very powerful from, Viktor Frankl. If you have something you love, if you have someone you love, and if you feel loved by God, you'll be probably okay. Um, but what would you say to young people today in terms of coping? I don't know what exactly the situations are. You might have your finger on the pulse better.
Okay, talk to somebody. Find somebody to talk to. Remember, if you're a young person, you're just that. You're young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Things can change. Things can change in 2 seconds. I've certainly had that a number of times in my life. I'm 68. Um, and
You're a
I,
boy check.
what? Yeah, right. And I don't know how many times things have changed literally in 2 seconds, both for good and bad. And things can change. You can do something. Take responsibility for your life. If things aren't going right, figure out. Sit down. Think. Don't panic. Again, write. Organize yourself. Uh, Put it all down on paper. Get it organized. Uh, you will find a way, and find somebody who will talk to you. Very important. Find a rabbi, find a good friend. Good friends really do good things for one another. If you can't find anybody, now we're in the age of online. There are consultation services which you can go to. Um, write to somebody, find one of those, but don't give up. And remember something I said a couple of minutes ago. You are doing the best that you can given your circumstances and given your education and given everything around you. Somebody else uh, might might find you heroic in how you're dealing with it, um, given your circumstances. So yeah, um, go and volunteer. That's another idea. Um, go and find somebody who needs help more than you do. That's always satisfying. Um, giving is sometimes better than receiving, and by giving, you do receive. Uh, I've been a volunteer now for, 26 years. Um, and every time I see that somebody volunteers somewhere, they feel good because they're helping somebody else. So that's another idea.
That's really good stuff. I know that what you're saying is really the core of it all. What any concluding thoughts on what you would suggest to people?
Okay, look at our website. I'm doing a plug for us. Uh, take a look at our podcasts. Uh, there's some interesting stuff there. Take a look at that first course, which is called Pragmatic Empowerment Training. Um, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, contact us. We're very open to people. So,
Sure.
and
Well, doctor, I'd like to be the first one taking your course because what you said is, I can tell, is very true. And if I can gain skills that will allow me to help others, I think that's our obligation. And I think we live in a society where everything has become specialized, and we think that you need to have, a heart specialist and a this and a that. And all of that is somewhat true, but it's also somewhat false because a lot of things are actually really simple. And one of the things that are super simple is that humans, and this is what you were saying before, humans need humans, right? So I remember a psychologist telling me he was hired by the state of New York to deal with addiction, and he put people always in the 12-step program. He says people need other people. And so no matter how good your psychiatrist, psychologist is, in a way, it will never replace a good friend. And I
yeah,
think that is a obligation that we all have. And part of the issue is, I'm going to say a story of a young lady that I know. Unfortunately, her sister committed suicide, and she's racked with guilt. She's destroyed. Why? With all due respect to her, is maybe she should have been more involved in her sister's life. And this happens a lot. That people, there's a lot of this. Do you want me to stop? You want to say something?
yeah, I would not say that she was in, guilty at all. It was her sister's decision. She is not guilty. Um,
Yes.
I want to
Yes.
be very clear about that kind of thing.
Right.
You might have Each person has his or her own responsibility.
Sure.
So do not take guilt and do not feel ashamed because somebody else committed suicide.
Right.
Uh, do not have this survivor guilt either.
Right.
That's very important. The
Yeah.
other thing that I want to suggest is that if there are other people who feel like you do and who are kind of lost, get together with them, form a self help group,
Right. Right.
uh, and maybe get somebody who's a kind of an expert to be an advisor to them. A lot of people are willing to do that.
Sure.
When you talk to somebody and when you see that people are in the same boat that you are, then that helps. By the way, I should also say that there are lots of suicide helplines around. Wherever you are, help is only a telephone call away. There are lots of online help sites for suicide. Look, you will find somebody that you can talk to. We help we're in Croatia. We mentor a self-help group on suicide in Zagreb. My point is there are lots of these groups around, and if there isn't a group around, form one. That would be a great help to other people. Yeah. Remember, hope lives until you're dead, basically, and even then. So.
Yeah. So I think that I really want to encourage people to reach out to you. What's your website?
www.cwwpp. That's the P for Peter.
cwwpp.com.
.org.
.org. cwwpp.org. Now, the reason I think it's very important to reach out is because what the good doctor is trying to do is get barefoot therapists, people like myself, really anyone who has a little bit of initiative, a little bit of compassion, is not depressed, so has a little bit of energy, just to kind of become a kind of a barefoot therapist. And what that really means is to see yourself as capable of helping other people. A lot of times I think we don't do it. I was speaking before about specialization. We think you have to be specialized. You think that the person's cuckoo. Everybody can go through depression. Everyone can go through being down. Basically, what is really ultimately suicide is somebody that's very, very down. And everybody goes through ups and downs. And everybody can uplift someone else. And so you don't have to be some kind of a genius. But I do think it will be very useful for people to reach out to you to get trained. And I really would like to get trained because I think it would empower us. Instead of us feeling like, what can I do? Suddenly, when you go to somebody with the tremendous prestige, I know that you've done a lot of research with a lot of the top people in the world. When we sort of get trained by somebody as yourself, we'll feel at least competent and confident to be able to help others. I think that's super important. It doesn't take a lot, but you do have to have the kind of self-image that you can do it. And once you have that self-image, so practically, let's say I wanted to take the course with you, what would I do?
Okay, you would form a group of 3 to 10 people,
Yeah.
and you would contact me, and then we would set up a time. And with North America, it might be at it might be for me at 3 in the morning, but we would do this.
And how many sessions would we need?
As many sessions as is necessary. We don't set a limit.
But I mean, generally, do you think it would be 5 sessions we'd be trained, 10 sessions? I think
it would be more like a year.
What?
More like 6 months or a year.
6 months or a year, we'd be then really competent.
Right. Then you're online in general, we work for about an hour, a little more, once a week.
Once a week for about 6 months. So it's a serious commitment, but you walk away with competency, knowing that you can really help other people. And I'm going to see if I can reach out to people that want to do this. I think it's super important. And so I want to thank you very much.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure.
And as we are across borders, we will wish the world, soon Mashiach is going to come. I believe that having hope, as you mentioned, is very important. Certainly for myself, giving myself the hope in the coming of the Mashiach helps me tremendously. And I believe that Mashiach will come very soon. and we will have all our borders opened. I think Jerusalem will become the capital, spiritual center of the universe, and God will be revealed, and everybody will be one big happy family. And all, like it says, Umacha Hashem Dimo Me'al Kol Panim, God will wipe away tears from all face. Yibala Hamavas Lanetzach, death will be no more. We will live eternally. There will be a resurrection of the dead. And so really I would say to people, if anybody is watching and wants to take a rabbi's word seriously, never before have we remotely been in better times. I don't want to go into too much detail, but we're in amazing times. When you look at, you have to compare being a person today to 200 years ago. You're living double as long, you have much better freedom, much better education, much better healthcare, etc., etc. And that is not random. It's because we're coming into an infinitely blessed time. So this other program I did earlier, one of the messages of a guy who really went through depression, came out of it. One of his messages was like, just hold on, keep on, just wait, see what's going to happen. He says he's a believer in God. So one of the things he told himself, let me see where this takes me. And eventually it took him to a wonderful place. And like you said, things do change. So when we're in that depressed mode, all we can think about is how bad reality is. But the truth is that when we look at reality as a whole, it's actually never been better. And actually, it's always getting better. And it's amazing, relatively speaking. I'm not saying that there aren't problems, but relatively speaking, just like we're living in messianic times. And so therefore, just hold on to the fact that in 1 second, God can literally bring Mashiach. He can certainly transform your life. And a lot of life is about spiritual growth. It's about learning lessons. And I would have to say, to learn a lesson, you have to go into a cave. Because when you're high and mighty and everything's good, you're not learning lessons. You're having a good time. Nobody's learning lessons of life when they're in Disneyland. But when you're in a cave, when you're down, actually, and this is a very important study from the Army, where people, of course, stress is a major factor in depression. Unfortunately, a lot of vets commit suicide. But actually, like 5 years after these traumatic incidents, when you ask these people, so would you give up your trauma? That's like the worst thing that ever happened. They would say no. Why? I can say that with my own life, because that is the thing that gave me the most insight into life. And here's the interesting thing. It's not like we like to think of life as a progression. Well, I'll go to university, I'll learn, I'll become smart. No, you're learning while you're suffering. So while you're in this pain, you're actually learning so much more. Now, unfortunately, there's a difference between depression and anxiety. But yes, what do you want to say?
If you approach the trauma the right way.
If you approach it the right way.
Because, and I want to give a cautionary note on that. A lot of people suffer from trauma very, very badly. They have very bad symptoms. If you have a trauma, get it treated. Do not let it go. People say, oh, I'll get over this. Oh, you'll be okay. Do not do that. Find somebody who is an expert in trauma, who knows what he or she is talking about, and talk to them. And that applies to the traumas that you've experienced in childhood. That applies to the traumas that you've experienced as an adult, anything. And the earlier you get it treated, the better. Be very, very careful with this. And even if the trauma has happened 20 years ago, 50 years ago, go to an expert and get it treated, because it will help you. You will feel much better. Dealing with the trauma can be very painful. I'm not saying no, but believe me, it's worth it. It's worth that little bit of extra pain to get rid of it, because then you will get rid of it.
Can you maybe we can conclude with this? Can you share maybe a positive story, a success case, something to inspire someone, how somebody has overcome. You're dealing with, literally it was a war there, people with trauma. Can you share with us a success story of how somebody overcomes trauma and perhaps depression and goes on to have a good life?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've dealt with lots and lots of people who have had very positive outcomes. They've been with us for long periods of time sometimes, but they've talked, and I could think of men and women who have been in those situations. Um, there are lots. There is hope. If you get a good treatment, not necessarily drugs, and certainly not only drugs. And I want to emphasize that too. Drugs can help to relieve symptoms, but they do not relieve the trauma. Get some sort of psychological therapy.
Right,
And it does work. It may take time, but it works.
right, right. Okay, thank you so much. I think we've gotten a lot of information in a short amount of time. And I want to bless anybody who's watching that you should get better, and we love you, and you're worth it, and God made the world for you, and you can make the world an amazing place. Just believe in yourself. Sometimes I think there are a lot of hurt people. I have a sister, she's very wise. She says, hurt people hurt people. So if anybody ever hurt you, it's because they were hurt. There's a subconscious jealousy of somebody who's not. It even can be from parents to children. Even their, love and hate can even exist simultaneous. And so therefore you have to understand that there are people that love you, even though there are somebody that might have hurt you, and you are loved very much by hundreds of millions of people that don't have that pain in them and that just have unconditional love. And certainly God, your creator, wants the best for you. We all want you to be an amazing human being that you truly already are.
I completely agree.
As they say in the classics, a dank.
And you, and you.